Welcome to Creative Path, the podcast for anyone interested in being more creative. And I'm Jaime. A little intro. I'm a designer, traveler in general, and in general, a curious person. I'm not a general. We're going to get into motivation today, but before we do that, I wanted to just give a really quick little recap. So I made a new podcast cover. We're in season 2. I took a break from doing season 1 to season 2. I took some time off. I think at some point I'll really talk about how important rest is to the creative process and in general mental health. And honestly, as I've been doing this podcast, I've been seeing more and more that creativity is a part of human health or human psychology in general. But this past month, I also moved. I also took a comics class. I did a couple of side projects. It was a time, and it's why it took me a hot second to get back to this podcast. But I also wanted to give a little bit of more of an intro about who I am. So I am a designer now. I've been a designer for about 5 years now. And before that, when I was in university, I studied psychology. And I studied abroad in Finland for my junior year. Unfortunately, I am one of those study abroad kids where I just, for whatever reason, have to talk about it. It's a part of who I am. I've been trying to integrate more parts of myself into my story. So it can be hard to explain all of these different facets. I'm sure that other people relate to that as well. And how much do you talk about like who you are? And to give context, I'm working on my portfolio, which is part of why I'm talking about motivation and also why I'm diving into this stuff right now as well. So bear with me. Anyways, so when I came back to the US after studying abroad, I had the hardest year of my life. I've had other challenges go on, but I think the issue that I had with this specific time, there were other hard things happening, but I also had this in general feeling that I had backed myself into a corner, shot myself into a foot, however you want to say it. I thought I had ruined my life because all of the grades that I had gotten when I was in Finland, they have a different grading system. So they have 1 through 5. And if you get a 4, that means you had 85% to 95%. So like in the US, I think we have 80% to 90% is a B, 90% to 100% is an A. I actually did that wrong. It's 80 to 89%. Anyways, but that made it so when I came back to the US, all of my grades were like basically lower than they would seem in Finland. And when you study psychology, you know, it's of course a really interesting subject. There are so many ways that it impacts my daily life. We work with humans. It has been a very impactful, important thing, but it is a hard thing to find a job straight out of college in. So I was stressed out of my mind. I felt like I had just ruined everything. I also, during the junior year of college, you're also supposed to figure out what track you want to do, what you want to do with psychology. And I had done none of that. I came back, was trying to put my life back together, and it was tough. And I decided to travel, explore. I think one of the things that I've realized is that when I have a lack of motivation, when I have a space of being really lost and I don't know what to do next, I don't have any gut feelings, to me, that's a time when I need to learn. I need to learn about what I should do next. And it's interesting because those are the most stressful times of my life, but they're also the times that I explore and have some of the most important experiences. And I say that not like it's in the past, because I think that it would be naive to think that I got this and I know what is going to come around the next corner in life. You never know. So anyways, during the time after college, I worked at a fish factory doing 16 hours a day of QA work. It was brutal. It allowed me to save up and do some more traveling. I ended up getting a TEFL certificate to teach English with some of that money. And I ended up working in France for a number of months during a year, and I had some amazing experiences. I started picking up French. I learned how much I really enjoyed doing design because I did all of the little signs and all of these little pieces at camp. And one day I was out at lunch with a group of friends from camp. There were 4 of us. And we were talking about what we wanted to do after camp. And I had figured out that I was going to do something. I was going to do something that required more school. I needed some more education to do what I needed to do. And I was either going to go back to school to study public health, or I was going to study design and become a designer. And I had a feeling about which one I wanted to do, but I wanted to bring that to the table and get some feedback from some other folks as well. And my friends encouraged me to get into design. And so I moved back to the US, stayed with my parents, went to community college, studied for about 2.5 years, and I got my certificate in design, and I've been in it ever since. All of those things changed my life. I don't even think design was ever something I thought of doing. And sometimes I find myself being jealous of people who studied design or studied art and all of these things in high school and just knew what they wanted to do. I think I will always be a little bit jealous of that. And that's just, I'm at peace with that jealousy. But I have been thinking about this story and how I got into design recently because I've decided that it's time to start working on my portfolio. I only have student projects in there right now, and it's important to have some like real work in there, some professional work. And I have just been having the hardest time being motivated. Even on days when I have some extra time, it's just, my cat is under the bed coughing. So sorry if you can hear that. Where was I? So I have just been having a hard time, and I was thinking about why I had such an easy time working on my portfolio when I was in college and why it's more difficult now. There was one day where I really needed a kick, a push. So I listened to a podcast, and unfortunately we are going to do a podcast within a podcast. Maybe fortunately, we'll see. I was listening to Mel Robbins Podcast with Dr. K from Healthy Gamer. And the title of it, I'll put it in the show notes, but it was something about how to get motivated. But I want to break down some of the things that Dr. K said. It's about an hour-long conversation that's absolutely worth a listen. But I think there's some quick hits that I could bring in that directly tie into creativity and could be interesting. So to give a little bit of context, one of the things that Dr. K said is that motivation is not one single thing. It's a collection of things. And when we're feeling stuck and we think that we have a lack of motivation, that's not necessarily true. It's not that we have a lack of motivation. It's that we have a motivation to stay exactly where we are, which was kind of a game changer for me because that's what helped me realize why I thought I was not motivated to do something. It's not that I'm not motivated to work on my portfolio. It's that I'm motivated to do other things. Like, why prioritize that one? So from listening to the podcast, I'm going to break down a few key points. And I numbered them 1 through 5 because I feel like things just feel right in 5s. So what things can we do? The first is reframe your motivation to do something. The more negativity that you bring, the harder it's going to be to feel motivated to do it. So he talked about how people will often use motivation or use negativity to be motivated, but then the thing they're doing also feels negative. So then you're just stuck in this negative loop. For instance, if you're trying to work out, you're hard on yourself, you're beating yourself up, and then you go to the gym and then your workout sucks, you're in pain, you're not used to that level of exercise, and you just get caught in this loop between the two. It's just a hard place to be. So as much as you can, reframing your motivation, so not doing something to shame yourself, but reframing it, not necessarily thinking that it's going to be perfect or, oh my God, I'm going to have the best time ever working out. You're probably not, but thinking about, okay, it's going to be challenging, but here are some things that are going to make this okay. And just like reframing it in your mind. One of the other things that he said, the second point, is to separate yourselves from the outcome. And I think about this almost every day with design specifically. This is why I was like, wait, I have to talk about this on this podcast, because I think that happens on projects a lot, where you start thinking about the outcome and you start identifying with the outcome. And it's important to focus on the process, not the outcome. There's so many things in the outcome you can't control. And I think when you're motivated, let's say you're doing a project and you want someone to finally acknowledge you, that's your motivation for doing it. Then you do the thing, then that person still doesn't care. And it kind of wipes your motivation. You're less motivated to do that thing again because the outcome wasn't what you wanted. And I just think it's really important to separate yourselves, like get the outcome out of your head and focus on the small actions. The third point, I think, starts getting a little bit more heady, but it's really interesting, which is give yourself time to reflect. Like a direct quote from him is, it's important to sit with the consequences of your actions. And when you do something that you really like, you should take the time to give yourself a pat on the back. And he also said that giving the brain space to process reinforces behavior. And this has been a really interesting point. I think when I'm thinking about my break from this podcast, for instance, I thought about, okay, what were the days that were hard? Because there were hard days. It's hard to talk into a microphone and hope that someone's listening, hope that I'm making sense, hoping that I'm not rambling too much. And at the same time, doing this podcast has been one of the most rewarding things this year, because it feels like I'm building community. It feels like I'm less alone, and I guess in a weird way, that I'm going for something that I actually want to be doing. And having that time off to reflect and think has just reinforced that this is something important to me, that this is something that I want to do. And this also takes me to his fourth point, was take the time to understand all parts of you. And I don't think I've ever heard this in any motivation space. It's also, I think, a really critical piece. So he said the biggest piece with hacking your motivation is spending time with different parts of yourself. And I've been thinking about this a lot, because I've also heard from other places, other sources, that we're not one person, we're a collection of different pieces of ourselves with unique motivations, desires, and ideas. And sometimes they're in conflict with each other. And I think this is important, especially in adult life, where everything is just a little bit more gray area. When you're in school, there's a kind of a direct shot. You're studying this, you're doing this, you take this test, you're done with that class, you're studying this to become these things. And when you're outside of school, it can be this murky area where you're not sure what you're doing. You're not sure why you're doing it. You're not sure if you like it anymore. And it's important to take the time to understand the parts of you that are motivating you, or you think are not motivating you. And I think it also takes me into the space of, I can't use other people's solutions for my problems. I feel like when I was younger, I would see how other people did it. Okay, they went to school for design and then they got a job at an agency, blah, blah, blah. And now I'm at a point where I have a collection of experiences, and the only way for me to figure out my path forward is through experiencing, or is through processing my own life and my own experiences and wants and needs and whatnot. And it's interesting because I feel like if you don't look at what is motivating you, sometimes when you're at the end of an experience or something that you've worked for, you realize that what motivated you, it actually doesn't matter to you anymore. And I think that understanding ourselves and taking the time to process experiences in our lives can help us understand our compass a little bit more and understand how we can tap into motivation that's helpful for a specific thing we're trying to do. And to top off Dr. K's words, I have one more that was just from me. And that is making the thing that you're dreading more enjoyable. And there are various ways that you can do that. So one thing is to start with the easy stuff first, to break things up into smaller pieces. Start with the smaller, more easy, more enjoyable pieces. And then you get more motivated as you accomplish things, and you can start moving forward rather than just thinking, oh, this is going to be so hard, I can't do this, and getting into that negative loop. I think that's one way to get out of there. And I also think that there's something really powerful about going on a nice walk or getting a nice coffee or doing something rewarding after you finish something really hard. I don't think that that should be taken lightly. So those are all of the points that I wanted to make about motivation. And after listening to Dr. K's podcast, I actually took a break from doing my portfolio, wrote the outline for this podcast, and it's been a lot easier for me to work on my portfolio because I took the time to figure out, why am I doing this? Why, like when I do this podcast, in some cases, it's a little bit of a journaling session. I'll journal a little bit and then I'll figure out an outline. But getting that journal piece out helps me understand myself more and understand how I could harness my motivation. So I'm feeling better, and I hope that this podcast was helpful. Please like and review, and I'll catch you next time.